Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of This Is Your Captain Speaking. Super excited to have somebody on today that I've been a bit of a fanboy of over the past years as well, I have to say. Um, our guest today is somebody that's incredibly well known in the area of positioning, right? She has written a couple of books around that. One of them is a best-selling book called Obviously Awesome, How to Stand Out in Noisy, Crowded Markets, right? Now coming up as well, she's just released another book called Sales Pitch: How to Build a Story to Stand Out and Win. In addition to that, been working with more companies than I want to mention here. I can see from your experience here, companies such as Hawaii, where she was the vice president of marketing for enterprise products for a number of years, all the way up to founder of her own business at the moment called Ambient Strategy. Our guest today is April Dunford. Really great to have you on, April.
Well, it's great to be here. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I was
Absolutely.
like, when you say it's this is your captain speaking, are you the captain or am I the captain?
You're the
I keep
captain.
just,
You
am
are the
I the
captain.
captain?
You are the captain. It's not.
Yes.
I am not the captain.
Finally.
No, so I am
Heck, I
definitely
love
not the
it. I
captain.
love it. It's about time.
Absolutely love it.
Buckle up, passengers.
Absolutely, there might be some turbulence. So, April, tell us a little bit about your past, and like I'm really interested to know. So you're clearly like as I mentioned, I'm not just joking that I'm a fan. I also have this on my bookshelf just beside my desk. So
It's adorable. Great.
and also your steps in terms of how you build out a positioning strategy or how you build out new positioning for an organization.
Yeah.
Those 10 steps that you use. I've also used that across a couple of different brands that I worked with. At
That's awesome.
Marmind as well, we've also taken some of the process that you've spoken about in there as well and
Love
implemented
it.
when we're coming up with our positioning. Like, how did you get to a point in your career? So if I look back at like your career, like you were chief operating officer at one organization, you were at Sprintly, you were the CEO, for example, and then getting to the point where you're like, okay, I'm going to write a book about my experience or how to help brands. Like, how did that whole
Yeah.
thing come about?
Well, like at the end, when you get senior, they start giving you all kinds of titles. But really, what I was a repeat vice president of marketing at a series of venture-backed startups, and through that, and I did a lot of them, like 6 or 7, and all of them except the last one got acquired. So then through acquisition, you end up at the big company, which is how acquisitions work. But through all of that, I was generally running marketing teams. Sometimes I ran inside sales as well. And then sometimes, you get, if it's a really small company, you get kind of broader mandate than just marketing, and they'll give you a made up title like COO, which apologies to COOs who actually do operations. But in tech startups, often if you're running more than one or two things, they'll just say, okay, we'll call you COO because we don't know what else to call you. So I did that for 25 years, but I really considered myself kind of a head of marketing. That's what I was doing. And then about 8 or 9 years ago, I made the switch to doing consulting. And for the first year or so, I was doing this kind of fractional head of marketing thing. And then I switched to doing this thing. And so now what I do is I'm very focused on positioning. I only work with B2B tech companies, in particular ones that are more enterprisey, like they have a sales motion somewhere to get the deal done. And I switched to that mainly out of my experience. When I was in-house, I did an awful lot of positioning work. And so through doing that positioning work, I came up with a way to do positioning, which when I switched to consulting, I thought, well, this would be a good thing to teach people because there doesn't seem to be a standard method for doing positioning. And, so that's something that I could contribute to people and I could sell that as a consulting engagement. So that's what I do now. And I've been doing that for, like, say, 9 years or so.
That's also like I can completely relate to that, as we've just spoken before this in terms of how I operate and what I do as well is very much similar to that.
Yep.
Well, it is that fractional piece, but that's enough about me. But on when we're talking about like how you manage to refine your process, right? So like you've gotten to a point where you were COO, but essentially the head of marketing in a number of organizations, right? And you were constantly going and doing that positioning exercise, as you said. Like how to get to the point where you have a good refined model, how many times are you failing Or was there many failures along the way, or is it
Oh man,
hard
there's
to
so
say?
many failures. Like at the beginning, like it took me a long time to come up with the method. So at the beginning I thought, well, somebody's figured this out already. So I'll just have lots of coffee meetings with smart marketers until somebody tells me how to do this. And so I did a lot of those and nobody ever told me. Everybody was kind of flailing around like I was flailing around. And eventually I decided, well, at that point, I had repositioned three or four different things. So I thought, well, I can logic this out in my own brain. And so the first thing I thought was, well, we could split positioning up into component pieces, solve for the component pieces, and then smash it together. And that seemed like a logical way to do it for me. It was also not difficult to split it up into pieces because in the marketing literature and everything else, we kind of agree on what the piece parts are of positioning. There's five things. It's competitive alternatives, differentiated capabilities or attributes of the product in the company, differentiated value, which is the big thing we really care about. Customers don't care so much about features. They care about what are the features going to do for my business. And then what's the best fit customer look like? And then what's the market category we intend to win? So those are the five things. And when I got to that point, I thought, well, I just need to figure out the best way to get the best answer for each of these things. But once you split it up, you realize that the components have a relationship to each other. So if I take something like differentiated value, the value that my product can deliver for customers that no other product can, is actually completely dependent on my differentiated capabilities. We don't get to just make it up. It doesn't just come from nowhere. It comes from the stuff we can do that no one else can do. So those two things are related. But then when you think about it, the differentiated capabilities are only differentiated when I compare them to a competitor. So I can't figure out those things. They're all kind of tied together. Same thing with best fit customers. My definition of a best fit customer is a customer that really, really cares a lot about the value that only I can deliver. That's what makes them a good fit. And then same thing with market category. Market category is kind of like the context we position a product in such that this differentiated value kind of makes sense to these people. So once I split it out, I had this kind of insight that, oh, wow, well, the things all relate to each other. So we should be able to start in a spot and then build. The problem is there didn't seem to be a good starting point. So for a couple of years, I worked on this stuff where I considered it a spiral. We would take a random starting point, and usually we'd start with capabilities because that's easy and we know that the most, and then work my way around the circle. And then, we'd get candidate positioning and we go try it out in the market. And lots of times it failed. If it worked, it was great. We just ran with it. But if it failed, then we have to go back and take another run at it again. And that was very frustrating. And as a, new vice president of marketing, it's not a bad way to get fired. So I did that a bunch of times and I thought, man, well, this really sucks. Like it sucks when we get it wrong. And so there must be a way for us to do this thing where our chances of being successful are much higher. And eventually where I landed was, and it came from looking at jobs theory or jobs to be done and reading Clayton Christensen's work, Competing Against Luck and some other things, and having a lot of conversations with people on the product side that seem to be really into this jobs theory stuff. And the epiphany was we actually have to start with competitive alternatives. We start there. If we don't start there, then what we get is positioning that sounds good in the office, but we take it out and it's insufficiently differentiated from the other things a customer could do, and so therefore it fails. But if I start with competitive alternatives, then I can start there and say, okay, well, who do we compete against? And then I can look at, well, what have we got that's different from them? And then I can translate those capabilities to value. That gets me differentiated value. And then once I have that, I can say, all right, well, what are the characteristics of a target account that make them really care about that value? And I can build best fit customer profile. And then from there, I can say, okay, I got this value, trying to communicate to these people. What's the best context to position the thing in that gets me market category? So that's how that's like 6 years of messing around summarized in 4 minutes.
In 4 minutes. I mean, it was a
in
great summary.
Podcast, but that's how I came up with it in the end. Now, is that the only way to do positioning? I believe it is not. But I haven't seen a lot of other methods that I think work better than that. And so that's what I've been working for folks. The other caveat I'll put on that is I built that working with companies that are, be in market with a certain amount of traction, B2B tech companies that have a sales team. If you are not a B2B tech company in market with a certain amount of traction that has a sales team, I cannot guarantee you that that will work because I just didn't build it with these other things in mind. So sometimes consumer products will call me. Like I had a great conversation with some gals a couple of weeks ago. And they have this super cool organic makeup line. They own a farm. They're growing the ingredients. It's awesome. But I have no background in consumer products. And, and I would not warrant that my stuff works in consumer products, although some people send me emails and say it does. Does it work consistently? I don't know. I don't know, man.
I think there's probably a certain element to that which is just sticking by a playbook in a way that's like following out a number of steps, which then translates from different vertical to vertical. Most
Well,
likely.
it's better than winging it. I can tell you that much.
Which I think a lot of people.
Better than winging it.
I think it's definitely better than winging it. I would imagine that a lot of people probably do try to wing it, or they don't know where to start. Like
well, they don't know where to start. Like I was winging it too. Like and it didn't always feel like I was winging it, even when I was. Like we'd start, usually what would happen, and I see this a lot in companies that I work with now, is everybody understands that differentiated value is the big thing, right? Like why pick us over the other guys? That's what we're trying to get at here. And so a lot of companies will try to start there. And the problem with starting there is, we don't know if it's real. And so what you'll get is a group of people from the company will get together and they'll say, well, why does everyone love us? And sales will say, you know why people love us? They love us because the sales team is so nice. We are just nice to them. It's sales process. You laugh, but I hear this a lot.
Yeah.
Or customer service will say they love us because we have way better customer service. We're competing against these big guys and they don't do any customer support. We do customer support. But then I come in and I say, well, hang on a second. Like, when people bought the product, did they have any experience with customer service? And a lot of times the answer is no. And it's like, okay, well, that's not why they picked you. And I like the idea that, they picked us because the salespeople were nice. And maybe that does happen once in a while. But in general, the person making a purchase has to go and justify it to their boss. And so they can't exactly go to their boss and say, well, I don't know, things all look the same, but I really like John, and so I'm gonna do business with John. Like, I don't know if I'd have the guts to go to my boss if it was a $200K deal and say that's why I made the choice. Might be embarrassed about that. So the question is like, why are they picking your stuff? And there might be lots of different opinions about that inside the company. And so what I like about following a methodology is we start with something that we kind of know is true. Like if we're a B2B company and we have a sales team, we know who we compete against because we know what we're displacing. So we know what status quo in the account is. And we know who ends up on a short list against us because any good salesperson worth their salt is asking that question. Who else are you looking at? So we know that this is truth. And so we can stick the stake in the ground and say, okay, that's true. We know this. There's no guessing about this. And then we can say, okay, well, if we know we always compete against Oracle, how are we different than Oracle? And this is just feature function. This isn't value yet, just feature function. And then we can say, well, we know we have this feature and they don't. Or we know we do this thing and they don't. We know we price this differently than they do and they don't. So we can make the list of things that make us different. And then knowing what we know about customers and what they find valuable, we can do that translation and say, well, this feature is interesting because it helps them make money in this way. Or this feature is interesting because it helps them save money in this way. And then we've got differentiated value. And I'm telling you, when we do it that way, what we get to is often a very different list of value props than we got if we just got the gang together and everybody gave their opinion. Because a lot of times the things that people think are really valuable, they are valuable. They're just not differentiated in any way. Like you do it, Oracle does it, everybody does it. So that's not why they picked you, because that's all the same. That's table stakes. They picked you for these incremental things that you can do that are different. We need to get at the value of that.
That's very interesting. You've mentioned Oracle a few times now as well. And
I'm just picking on them because everybody hates Oracle.
everybody's let's
Sorry,
say
Oracle.
let's throw to Adobe and Salesforce in there as well, just to give a bit
I
more
know I should have
spring.
put Salesforce in there. They're one too. Everybody's competing against Salesforce, although we like them better.
Yeah, absolutely. I know the space relative. Let's talk about one space that they operate in, right? So let's talk about maybe the cloud space or the marketing automation space, right? So if we're
Sure.
talking, I've worked at a couple of different brands that focus on retail, and Salesforce being big competitors, Oracle and Adobe also playing big roles there as well. And that
Yeah.
space is like thousands of competitors in that mid-market space.
It's horrible. It's
So
amazing anybody sells anything. Yeah.
exactly. I also think the same thing. It's like, how in the hell do more competitors pop up like every single week, right? It seems like that there's more and more competition coming into that market. How are people managing to sell?
Well, so I think there's a handful of things that are interesting. So one is when companies come to me, they always tell me this. They say, "Oh my gosh, we have so many competitors. There's a list of 1,000 competitors, and so I don't think we have anything that's really differentiating against all 1,000 of these." But here's the thing: a customer, if you ask a customer, they're not looking at 1,000. They're looking at three. And so the question is, how did they come up with three? How did they make that list? And it may be true that if you look at a space like marketing automation or CRM, that there's 1,000 customers, but that there's 1,000 competitors. But a customer looks at it and says, okay, look, I'm a medium business, so I ain't going with Oracle. And in fact, there's 100 competitors that only serve the high end of the market. I'm not going with any of them. And then they'll say, all right, and I got a requirement, I'm in healthcare or banking and it needs to be compliant with some compliance thing. Well, that just eliminated like half the field right there. And they'll say, well, we got an accounting system and we got to integrate with that. Oh, that eliminates a whole bunch beyond that. And now all of a sudden you're looking at actually a subset. So in these giant markets like CRM or marketing automation or customer service software, ERP, like you'll look at it and on the surface of it, you'll think, how does anybody do a deal? But these markets are massive. They're billions and billions of dollars. And what's happening is we're fighting out in subsegments of this market. And so we're not actually competing with everybody. We're competing with companies that serve healthcare companies in the mid-market that are compliant with whatever, that can do this, this, and this. And all of a sudden you're looking at actually a very small list of competitors. Here's the other thing is often the companies I come to work with, they'll say, well, we have this giant list of competitors. They'll list them all. But half of them, yeah, if you looked at their website, they look just like you. They look like they should compete with you. But for whatever reason, there's this long list of competitors that never, ever, ever lands on a short list against you. And so if they're never landing on a short list against you, guess what? They're not competition. I don't know why they're not competition. It could be that they're brand new and they don't have a sales team. It could be that they're focused on a completely different market from you and their website sucks and they don't actually say that. It could be, there could be 1,000 reasons why customers don't put them on the short list. But if you never see them on the short list, you don't have to worry about them. So I think we are often overly intimidated by what looks like a field of thousands of competitors when really what we have is one or two. And almost every company I work with, when we get through that step in the workshop where we're talking about competitive alternatives, we're generally dealing with one or two biggies and maybe a long tail of ones that we see once in a while, but we almost never lose a deal to.
That's very interesting. It's reassuring for people, for companies within that space, in those super crowded spaces. And I think as well, you mentioned something there that I want to touch on as well around having going really niche with your ICP or with your ideal customer within that space. So when you're going after the customer, so let's say, for example, you're not just going after retail, but you're going after online fashion retail. as
That's right.
as an example, right? So you're going out and trying to win that specific space, right? And there's probably a handful of competitors in there rather than broad, like going broad and looking at everything retail, right?
Well, that's exactly it. And like that's how we have to start. So if we're a startup, that's how we wedge into a market. We can't win everywhere, right? We're not going to go in and say, "Okay, watch out, Salesforce. We're on the scene, all 4 employees. We're coming for you." Like, no, yeah, that's not how you're going to get your first bunch of deals. But can you beat them in specific underserved submarkets? Well, heck yeah, they're a great big company. They are serving everybody. And you can come in and say, oh, but if you're online retail, it doesn't have this set of things that you wish it did. And you could build a beachhead in there and say, look, we're going to wedge into this little wee market. But don't worry, like once we get enough deals there and that's looking good, then we can start expanding the boundaries of that market. So maybe we start with online retail and maybe we're very specific like e-commerce businesses. Then we move out to businesses that do online and stores, and we start with ones with just a few stores, and then we move up market and we can go to ones with bigger stores. And then the next thing you know, we're kind of competing in retail all over the place. Now that's looking like an interesting business. And then once we get there, we might say, okay, well, what looks like retail? Like there's other things that are maybe adjacent to that. And eventually we get big enough to challenge the leader in the space. That is typically how we get into a market. We don't come in and say, us versus Oracle, they're dead meat.
Good luck.
Because,
May God be on your side. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
We're here, fork and knife in hand. Like,
Exactly.
no, you're going to lose. They're big, they're huge. But there's always opportunities at the edges of big markets because it is impossible to serve the needs of lots and lots of niche markets. And some of these niche markets are very big. Like I worked at a company where we were specifically in the CRM space, and we started with investment banking. And, we ended up getting acquired. But at the time of the acquisition, we were 80 million revenue, and we never really stepped outside of investment banking. We had a plan to. So we had a plan to go to retail banking and then insurance, and then we were going to go challenge the leader. But even without stepping outside of investment banking, we very quickly grew from 2 million to 80 million in about 18 months. So, I mean, people will say, oh, but that's not a big enough market. And it's like, I don't know, man. How big does the market need to be?
It sounds big enough to me, to be honest
Right.
with you, if you're seeing that type of growth. So,
Right. So, I mean, I think people worry about getting into a niche market because they think, oh, well, there's not enough opportunity. And, the bigger the addressable market, the more opportunity there is. But it actually works kind of the opposite. Like if you can narrow it down, your ability to serve that customer becomes really, really focused. And then your ability to win against a very general purpose, although established and big competitor, goes up because you can come in and say, yes, Salesforce is absolutely the leader in this space. They're amazing. They're fantastic. Their product's amazing. Everybody's amazing. Mark Benioff's a great guy. But this thing does not meet the needs of small quick serve restaurants, for example, or, pick your little slice. And that gives you an opportunity to get a beachhead and then work your way in there.
yeah, no, so I can only absolutely agree, 100% agree, because I've seen it work a number of times, actually in that space that we were just talking about there, where I worked with an organization that focused purely on fashion retailers and managed to check off the bigger players. So the big boys were in the room, right? So it was Salesforce, Adobe, and Oracle. And we managed to pop off some of their customers as we started to grow in some of the bigger markets like the UK and the US, and people started to replace Adobe, for example, with us, right? And then the same thing happened with another organization, which was also in the same space, and they were trying to serve to too many different verticals. So they were like, we could do e-commerce and we can do hospitality and we can do publishing and we can do this, and the other. And they're spreading themselves way too thin. The sales force were running around trying to sell to everyone and everything. But going a mile wide and an inch deep, and actually about a year and a half ago, the CEO just put his foot down and said, no, we're focusing on this one specific space, which was quite niche. And since then, like, they've gone on a rocket ship. You know, everybody just focused on that and saying, hey, the other verticals, like, if stuff comes in, great, but we're not going to focus on it.
I mean,
So
this is how it generally works.
yeah, focus is a magical thing, right?
Focus is a magical thing. Like, and you know what? It's not just like it's not just being able to build a product that meets the need of the market better. It's so much easier to do marketing. Like the ROI on your marketing, the ROI on your sales efforts. Like you know, you're targeting this very defined group of people, so it's easy to find them. It's easy to have messages that resonate with them. It's easy to build content that they love. Same thing with your Salesforce. Your Salesforce starts getting really, really smart because they know exactly the problems that focused market has. They know the questions because you get the same questions over and over again. You know, when they go to do a deployment, everybody can talk really smart. Oh, yeah, we know what your accounting system is. We know what your whatever is. We can do this deployment, no problem, because we've done 100 deployments that look exactly like you. And customers love that.
Yeah.
That's what they
Absolutely.
want. They want you to
Yeah.
come in and say, we've done a company that looks just like you 100 times. Everybody wants that.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting. It's something that Aaron Ross, you're probably familiar with Aaron Ross, also wrote about in predictable revenue, which predictable revenue has been outdated nowadays in terms of the process there. But some of the things that he did write about back then in terms of how they grew things at Salesforce, nail your niche. That's exactly what we're talking about here, is nailing that niche, because as you said, there's so many knock-on effects from nailing the niche that just make it so much easier for you as a business to grow, right?
That's right. Like you got to build a beachhead somewhere. And you know, you're not going to learn all that much by doing one deal in retail and one deal in telco and one deal in banking and one deal in, you know, healthcare. What have you learned? Nothing. You've only done one deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's change lanes a little bit because I'm just wary of time here as well, April.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about your latest book. So I know obviously Awesome, which brings us through the positioning exercise and has a 10-step guide in terms of what to do and how to implement and how to execute thereafter.
Yep.
Tell us a bit about sales pitch.
Yeah, so the idea is that I wrote Obviously Awesome with the idea that people don't have a process or a method to do positioning. And I thought it would be good to write that down, put it in a book. And then if anybody wants to use it, there's a good starting point. In the work that I do with clients, so I work directly one-on-one with B2B companies, we never actually stop at the positioning. We'll do the positioning, so we'll get a cross-functional team together, we'll work through the positioning, but then we got to test the positioning. And so the easiest, best, most direct way to test positioning is take the positioning and turn it into a sales pitch, train a salesperson on it, and then let's test it out live with some qualified prospects and see how it lands. So at the end of every workshop I do with my clients, we take the positioning and then we build a sales pitch out of that and then we go test it. Now, when I started doing consulting, I would always ask clients, I'd say, look, we can build a sales pitch however you like. If you have a structure that you like for a sales pitch, we can use yours or we can use mine. And, you know, I did like 100 workshops and nobody ever said, oh, yes, we have a structure and we like it, so please let's use ours.
Fair.
And so the structure I was using to build a sales pitch, it originally came from a structure that I had learned when I was at IBM, which they had got it from these guys called the Customer Executive Board, which were these famous sales consultants back in the day. But it was very tailored for IBM, like they did it as a consulting agreement. When I left IBM, I took bits and pieces of that sales pitch structure and I would say startupified it. And then I used an evolving version of that sales pitch structure for the next 15 years while I was working in-house. And then I brought it with me when I started doing consulting, and we use that in all of the workshops that I'm doing with clients. So I just assumed that companies had a sales pitch structure, and I didn't need to go write a book to teach people how to do that because that was an already solved problem. But then what I learned was, no, it is not. In fact, the vast majority of B2B tech companies, they all have a sales pitch. If they have salespeople, there's a sales pitch. Often that sales pitch is actually not really a pitch. It's more like a product walkthrough. Like it's more like we're just showing you as many features as we can in a first call. We're also doing discovery. And then once we know a bit more about you, then we will maybe build you kind of a custom pitch after that. But most folks have a standard pitch they do in a first call, and it doesn't contain any positioning at all. So we have marketing is all concerned about positioning and making sure that we're, saying the right things and highlighting our value. But then we get into a first call pitch and the sales team isn't necessarily talking about any of that stuff. So anyways, I thought it might be good since, at this point I'd worked with a few hundred companies building these sales pitches. And then a lot of the companies continued to use the sales pitch after the workshop. Like after we got done testing the positioning, they just carried on and kept using that pitch. So I thought maybe it would make sense to put that pitch structure into a book so that if anybody was doing their positioning on their own without me and then wanted to go build a sales pitch that maps to that positioning, they would know the structure of the pitch and the steps to go through to actually build one. So that's what book 2 is all about.
Nice. I mean, there's one thing that I just recognized when you were saying that you said a couple of times, I just assumed that companies had their own sales pitch template. The one thing that I've learned about working in B2B tech or SaaS tech is don't assume a thing ever. Never assume anything because
it's amazing, right? Like, isn't it amazing to you? Like how long we've been doing this stuff. Mm-hmm. And the number of times I come across something that I think, oh, well, there must be an accepted way to do that because we do that every day and every company does that every day. So we must know how to do that. And then you go look at it and you're like, oh, actually, no.
No, definitely
not
not.
Something. The sales pitch thing was surprising to me because unlike marketing, salespeople do a lot of training. Like if you go to mature sales organizations and experienced sales reps, they've all done training. They've done Sandler sales training or spin selling or, strategic selling. Like there's all these sales methodologies that folks get trained on. But when you look at that training, it will train a sales rep how to do discovery, how to handle objections, how to negotiate pricing, how to move a deal along in a pipeline, how to do closing, how to get buy-in, all this kind of fundamental sales skills that a salesperson needs to know. But there's an assumption in that training that a pitch just exists. Nowhere in that training do they teach individual salespeople how to build a sales pitch. And when you think about it, that makes sense. Individual salespeople should not be building a pitch. It comes from, well, where exactly? And this is the problem. So there might be a sales enablement group that's tasked with helping to build that stuff, but they'd usually be doing it working with marketing or working with product management. And so because it's this kind of cross-functional team, nobody really feels ownership of it. Like in some companies, you'll talk to marketing and they'll say, well, we own building the pitch, but, we build it, we throw it over the wall to sales and they don't use it. They just butcher it, pull out a handful of slides and do other things. And often that's because they're not building the pitch in concert with sales. And often because the pitch is based on positioning that sales was not involved in building. And so they don't know anything about it. They don't understand it. Often the pitch isn't a pitch at all. It's just a product walkthrough. And that's because they've gone to product management and said, well, build me a demo. And product management says, great, there's 5 drop-down menus. I'm just going to show you a demo where I click on every single drop-down menu and we show all the features and that's all we need, right? But the problem with that is it's not answering what the customer's question is. The customer's question is, why pick you over the other guys? Not show me all the stuff. Like, I need to know, why does this stuff matter? And is this stuff different from the stuff I'm going to see from your competitors? Yes or no? Like, why pick you over anyone else? So that what we need is a pitch that is designed specifically to answer that question. And so my second book is a stab at that. Again, I think there's other ways to build pitches and whatever, but most people are just, monkeying around and using the old pitch and trying to modify it into something that works. When I think what most companies need to do is blow the pitch right up, look at the positioning and then map the positioning to the pitch and build a pitch that answers the question, why pick us?
100%. And I think what you've just mentioned there before is just the pitch is not telling the story, right? And if it is telling the story, it's a story that a seller's come up with, which is okay sometimes, but you won't get away with that for too long, because then you end up selling. If you have 20 sellers in the team and they're all coming up with their own pitches, they're selling 20 different products, right?
Well, that's it. We got to be careful of that.
And you end up then in a situation with customer success being not too happy then a little bit further down the line when they start taking over an account and they see very quickly that whatever they've been pitched is something that maybe the product cannot do.
Well, this is it. Like, we need a pitch that reflects the positioning. Like, we're going to do all this work on this positioning. The positioning answers the questions. Why pick us over the other guys? Like, what's the value we can deliver that no one else can? We should have a pitch that is oriented around that.
Absolutely. Well, hey, look, April, we aimed for 20 minutes and we're on 35. So this has been a really, really great conversation. It's been like, I've really enjoyed it. And I can't thank you enough for all the insights, etc. Where can people get the sales pitch? And obviously awesome.
Well, you can buy those books wherever you buy books, which for 99% of people is Amazon. And so you can go there and buy those. But if you want to learn more about me and my stuff, it's aprildunford.com. These days, I've got a newsletter where I'm going deep on positioning stuff. And if you sign up for the newsletter, there's a set of free templates that go with the books so that you can work through this stuff on your own. So you can do that too.
Awesome. April, thank you so much. It's been really great speaking with you. And hopefully we can continue the conversation at another time.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for having me.
Sure. Guys, this has been another episode of This Is Your Captain Speaking. Tune in again next week for more great content. Thanks again, April.
Thanks.